members and attendees join the chat or the room, let me give you a bit of the background on the research forum. So the Good Governance Research Forum forms part of the Good Governance Academy. And that's where we use our platform to showcase new research initiatives, advances, not only in academia or in the research realm, but also in practice, to showcase that to our audience, to all contribute towards good governance, right? So please do visit our website and click on the Research Forum tab. There you'll see the discussion forums that we've got going, also parents, as well as our steering committee there. Our face is at the bottom of the page. So please feel free, reach out to us if you'd like to share any of your work that you're doing with us on the Research Forum through a webinar similar to this one, or, collaborate in any other way. We love to meet new people and work together. That said, it really is a big privilege to welcome our old friend Perrin from Coast here to share more knowledge with us within the broader frame of corporate governance and culture. I'll hand over to you, Perrin, to give us more background on that. But from my side, it really is such a privilege, and it's clear that you've got quite a following with our number of attendees today. So to our attendees and our audience, please tell us in the chat where you're from. Share with us any interesting facts or comments you want to during the presentation. Feel free to also post questions. You'll also see the Q&A function active today. We'll answer your questions if time allows. I'll hand them over to Perrin. Otherwise, we will still attend to them afterwards and give you feedback. Either way, and then also the emojis. Feel free to use them and share, show your appreciation. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us once again, Perrin. It's lovely to share the stage with you, and I will hand over to you. Thanks.
Lovely. Lindy, thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. And look, it's so lovely to see so many people joining us. I will start in literally just a moment because there's quite a lot to get through, and I want to make sure that everyone gets that opportunity. But I also want to give people that little time just to arrive. It's always a pleasure to come here and present. And I think the privilege really is the journey of discovery. It's the ability to be able to step out into the unknown, not really sure what you're going to find, and then have this wonderful place to come back and share what we're finding. I don't profess to have all the answers. In fact, I may not have many answers, but I have a lot to share. And so I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to start. So fingers crossed. Bingo, there we go. Let me know if that hasn't come up for you in the messages, but we're gonna start.
We can see you clearly. Thanks.
So we're going to be going a little bit of a journey today, exploring the performance of essentially how we're observing through the method that we're approaching governance and board dynamics. Some interesting aspects around collaboration and differences between boards and their executives. I want to cover a little bit around how we're observing and enhancing the development of that relationship, and we'll give a couple of case studies around that. And then I think really to conclude with what are our key findings over the last 3 years of research, and how that's informing our practice, but also the practice of boards. You'll know if you've joined my presentations before, I would like to start with a little bit of a kind of prod of wisdom. And this is from Anam Cara, book by John O'Donoghue. And I love the kind of first 2 sentences here. It's strange to be here. The mystery never leaves you. It never leaves us, right? And this is part of the journey that we're on. The mystery of governance is certainly never leaving me. Okay, So three aspects we're going to cover, and before that, we'll also do a little bit of a recap for those that aren't familiar with the work that we do. We're going to look at the observations on the perceptions on the quality of governance. Now, our data set is principally across the Channel Islands and the UK. So that is where our data is coming from, but I will share those observations that will then specifically focus and hone in on the differences and observations between boards and their executives and how we're able to identify those. And then we're going to finish off looking at the observations on the impact of a systems approach to board and governance development. And this is what I'm going to cover in the next 5 minutes, which is really a recap for those of you that haven't joined us before. There was a wonderful book written just recently by Matt Watkinson, and this is a quote that I took from it, and I think it's very relevant to our work in the area of governance. We have been looking at governance through the lens of systems thinking, or complexity, as some people would refer to it, principally because we're interested in the interrelationships within the dynamics of a board system and indeed the wider organization. We're not just interested in whether or not the boxes of compliance have been ticked. We're really interested in how, for example, the clarity of purpose influences the way in which people make decisions. And there are many examples of how we approach those questions. But I believe, and I think I absolutely warm to this quote, without this, we won't be able to respond to the crises that we're facing. And I use that in the broad sense, including aspects like climate change. And then one other little quote just to prompt us. Really, there's very little out there in this world, and I know that that's actually changing, and that's made me feel certainly much more kind of supported. But there's a lot of work now that is beginning to look at the way in which governance can be approached as a complex interconnected system, as opposed to a list of compliance checks that we need to function. So really, really good to see that this is actually now changing, even though we're 10 years away from it. Governance is a wicked problem. This is how I describe it, and it's how others describe it too. And essentially that means that there isn't a simple solution. It's a riddle of interconnected relationships that we need to try and uncover and solve. And that really means that if we acknowledge that governance is indeed complex, then we have two words that we don't like to look at within the governance field: unpredictability and uncontrollability. It doesn't mean that we should give up hope, though, because actually what it means is that our aim is not to control and predict, but actually to simply better understand the dynamics of the system, and then we can participate in that system more appropriately. So that has been our goal for the last four years. Those will be familiar. This is our model of governance. Three interconnecting elements: the decisions we make, the things we do, and the culture that emerges across a group. I'm not going to go into great detail. I've done that before, but if you want to look that up, you can find it obviously on our website. We approach governance as an interconnected system. Imagine there are 27, in fact, there are many more, but imagine 27 interconnected elements like clarity of purpose, quality of data, the way we do things. Some are clearly going to be more dominant than others. Some are going to be connected to others, some more strongly than others. And you've got this array of complexity within board governance and organizational governance. Our data says, and this has been repeated time and time again over the last 3 years, that there is a power law. This curve is essentially a power law relationship between the factors of governance that we're observing and the predictability, the probability that we're going to get high performing governance. And what that power law essentially infers quite strongly is that governance is indeed a complex system. We're seeing key attributes arriving as being core influencers in governance, and I'll touch on these later. We're seeing very strong interrelationships, and we're able to map those interrelationships with a quantifiable measure. This is a glorious heat map of the interrelationships between the indices that we measure across governance within organizations and boards. So our approach to measuring is obviously critical. We observe and follow the Chartered Institute's code for board reviewing. However, we are slightly different because we obviously heavily look and weigh in with technology using AI and machine learning to support much of our analysis. And perhaps that's where we're a little bit unique. Our 5 stages, I'm not going to read through all this, but all of these presentation materials will be available to you. So it's really for reference and it helps you with a little bit around our methodology of approach. We do have a slightly unique instrument that we use, survey instrument that we use. We ask people to slide a scale between strongly agree and strongly disagree, but we also ask people to indicate their level of confidence in that agreement. In other words, what evidence have you got to support your level of agreement? And we ask on 2 scales, agreement and quality. And we do that because it helps us get strong internal validation across our instrument and therefore the outcomes of our data. You'll see in a moment, we'll start to plot individuals and indeed our factors of governance on this 2x2 because we measure performance through agreement and quality and confidence. We can plot people. So you'll see that we can put people in the top right-hand corner. They can put themselves there saying we're high performing and we're really confident about that. Or equally, they could put themselves where perhaps you don't want them in the bottom right-hand corner. We are equally confident that we are not performing well in these particular factors. So it's a really interesting dynamic between the performance and confidence. And you'll see how this emerges in our data and case studies later on. Again, please don't read through all this right now, but it's there for reference. We want to assure you that essentially we validate our work both internally and externally. And in addition to this, obviously, we present regularly here at the Good Governance Research Forum. And again, this is an opportunity for us to have our work challenged and open to scrutiny. So thank you. So here we go. New stuff coming up. Okay, so what are we seeing from our data set over the last sort of 2.5 years? So what we've done is we've aggregated these data and we've tried to put them in a visual form that's hopefully easy to understand. So essentially, scale here is 0 to 100 above. It's a percentage score of both agreement or performance and confidence. If you think and remember back to our sliding scale, essentially 50% would be someone would not move their marker. They would remain central and therefore pretty agnostic. They neither agree nor disagree with the perceptions around the quality of governance across their organization or board. So in this instance, we're seeing a range between 50, people are barely moving, and 86% people are moving quite far to the right with a mean of 68%. And then you'll see confidence. Now you're beginning to understand how this works. Confidence, 60% and 88%. So essentially what we're seeing here is that people, and these are aggregate means for organizations. We obviously see much larger range across individuals within those organizations. These are aggregate means for an organization. So an aggregate mean for an organization around 50% means that the mean for that organization, people are pretty agnostic. They neither agree nor disagree with the perceptions of the quality of governance across that organization. You can imagine the conversations we had with that organization. But then equally, the other side of the scale, right? 86%. And we were seeing very high levels of perception of the performance of governance across these boards. And interestingly, and you'll see this as a general theme, the spread, the variance of means for performance agreement here and confidence. You'll see confidence has a smaller variance. And we see this generally across our data. So we're going to now look at the 3 core attributes that we measure. That is culture, decision-making, and the implementation or the oversight of the implementation of decisions. So fairly similar pattern as you might expect. But culture, here you can see, you can imagine if you were sitting in the organization in that 49% bucket. Essentially, when we had that conversation with that organization, it was pretty tough. We had to explain to them that the perception of the governance across your board, and in fact, this included executive leadership as well, was in fact pretty agnostic. But equally, we're seeing high-performing organizations as well with high-performing cultures with means of 71. And again, you can see this similar map, confidence. Confidence is a smaller variation, and you'll see this in a moment when we look across our 9 categories. But essentially, what we're seeing here is a similar pattern emerging, and then we'll move to decision-making. Again, broadly similar. We're seeing ranges across probably about 30%, between 48 and 85%, and then a smaller range in confidence with means of 67 and 76. And as we begin to unfold some of these data in a moment and use the case studies, you'll see how we can utilize these to support board and governance development. So finally, decision implementation. So this is really looking, for most boards, this is the oversight of the implementation of decisions. So it's essentially looking at whether or not they are overseeing the quality of the operations, the systems, the controls, the frameworks, the policies. Are they comfortable in that oversight? And generally speaking, actually, we're seeing this as a narrower band, which we're not going to infer anything from that, but as an interesting observation. And in fact, confidence broadens for this particular domain. So the variance between agreement and confidence is broadly similar in this particular aspect. Slightly different diagram, but looking at slightly different things. So within our framework, so we looked at the 3 domains: culture, decision-making, and decision implementation. Here we're now breaking those 3 into the 9 categories. So starting at the top, purpose and values, leadership quality, behavior and ethics form part of culture, information quality, information flow, decision maker quality forms part of decision making, and then communication quality, operational efficacy, and what we call reasoned persistence forming part of the implementation, the oversight of the implementation of decisions. And really, this is looking at the standard deviation of both agreement scores, so the perception of performance, and the confidence in that performance. And you can see that as we begin to dive a bit deeper into the data, that difference between the variances of performance and confidence are in fact extending into the 9 categories. So very simply, the blue factors that we're seeing here are showing higher levels of standard deviation, higher levels of variance. Now, what does that mean? Do you know what? We perhaps don't know the answer to that yet, but it's a really interesting observation, and this is what we're seeing even when we dive down. I haven't got it here because it gets a bit complicated, but I haven't put up the 27 factors that we measure. So, for example, 3 in purpose and values, 3 in leadership quality. I haven't gone as deep as that because I think it would be a little bit too much. But as an overall perspective, except for operational efficacy and communication quality, we're generally seeing higher variances in people's perception of confidence. In other words, they're unsure about the evidence that they have to bear witness to the performance that they're representing. So essentially, it can give an indication that organizations need to work harder at trying to put across the evidence to support the quality of these 9 categories, these 9 attributes. Okay, moving on, because there's plenty more to cover. Okay, so now let's have a look. So you've got the hang of these diagrams, so I don't need to tell you what they are, but let's have a look at what this means. So this is looking at the variations between boards and executives. It's taking the data that we had previously around governance, and then it's breaking out those between boards and executives. So when we say boards, we're meaning those in a key oversight role. Sometimes we work with organizations that wouldn't technically be classified as a board of directors because they might be a limited liability partnership, etc. But we're looking for those individuals that have strategic oversight rather than operational control. Executives, we're looking at those people that have operational control. So it might even extend in some organizations down to senior management as well as C-suite executives. So just place some context around who we're talking about. And interestingly, you're going to see a common theme here. So the board's perception of quality through agreement is quite narrow, whereas confidence is broad. Too worried about what the figures are, I think what's interesting is these differences. Executives, however, have a reverse. They have a broader perception of quality through agreement, but a narrower perception of confidence. So what is this kind of inferring to us? It's inferring that boards are relatively kind of stoic in their approach to their performance. They keep these in narrower bands and perspectives. They're not so wide ranging. Maybe that's a little bit around being a little bit conservative with responses. We don't want to be too high, but we want to be too low. So we're going to kind of place ourselves in this narrow band. Executives seem to have a little bit more maybe scope and freedom. I think that maybe they're seeing that as a consequence of that. I don't want to say that that's the truth, right? The truth can vary, but I think this is what we're seeing as a pattern. So what do we see across culture, decision making, and decision implementation? Similar theme, right? So we're seeing boards with a narrower scope of performance through their perception of agreement than executives. Executives clearly feel that they can express a perception around the nature of the culture that's pervading their organizations. Maybe there's more freedom, or maybe it's simply that boards do have a higher perception of culture. We're still unpicking that relationship, and hopefully we'll do that in the next 12 to 18 months. We're seeing, again, similar sort of pattern across boards and executives. Boards, again, in decision-making, wanting to confine themselves to a narrower band, but you'll see the mean averages, again, coming out very similar. Confidence, however, again, broader for boards, narrower for executives, with the performance score, again, being having more variance, being broader. And although not as stark, we can see a slightly similar pattern within the oversight of implementation. Now, I wonder whether this is because there is this kind of change in the board's role and responsibility at this point. The board is beginning to assign this responsibility to executives. Executives are beginning to own this responsibility. So there is kind of this, oh, okay, we own this responsibility, so we're going to narrow our perception, our range. Whereas boards are saying, well, yes, we own the oversight, we own the accountability, but operationally, we're not responsible. So maybe there's a perception that's a bit more freedom from boards here to be able to express their opinion. This is an inference. And it is emerging through some of our discussions, through the discussions with clients, but we don't want to say that that's an absolute truth because we probably can't. Right, launching into a little bit of a case study then. So this is an organization. This is real data from one of our clients. We carried out this assessment actually in June 2023. And you can see here, broad themes of scores, 66, 61, and 61. What does that mean? And with a governance score of 63, essentially it means that, broadly speaking, if we take everyone as an aggregate, boards and executives, they're moving to the right. They're saying, yes, we're saying the performance here is relatively good. They're moving away from that 50% of kind of agnostic, neither agree nor disagree. They're moving to the right. So you would think, well, that's okay then. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. A little reminder, this is how we can classify organizations across different bands of performance and confidence. So where do you want to see boards and executives, we'd like to see them all in the top right-hand corner, right? All perceiving that there is high performance with high levels of evidence to support that. Clearly, where we don't want to see people is in the bottom right-hand corner. So what are we seeing? Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit fascinating and why we think our work is really helping boards develop. So left-hand side, this is the board's perspective. Think about the colors. The blue is culture. The orange is decision-making. The yellow is the oversight of the implementation of decisions. Okay. So here we're seeing broad themes across this organization, but with quite a lot of variation. So if we look at the figures on the left-hand side, the board has a perception of culture across this organization. 83, they have gone way up, and you can see that, and we'll highlight that in a moment. But you can see they are extremely confident that things are good with respect to the culture. Look at executives. The blue is spread. In fact, the majority are in fact in the bottom right-hand corner. They are not quite as confident, but they are pretty confident that in their perspective, the culture here is not looking good. So a little bit of a dive into the deeper in this. So you can see here, culture for the board is clustered very tightly, top right-hand corner. They are saying things are good around here with respect to our culture. Executive, definitely not sure, although there is a little bit of an outlier. And this is the beauty of the technology. It allows us to identify outliers. So here is an outlier. So they do think that the clarity of the purpose and values for this organization are indeed clear. But as for many other things across organizational culture, perhaps not so. Interestingly, we're also seeing differences across the perception of decision-making. So, and interestingly, from the board's perspective, their perception around decision-maker quality. Now, that was an interesting conversation, as you can imagine. And then on the right-hand side, we can see the executive perception clustering a little bit tighter, but perhaps not where you'd really want it to be. And what are we seeing across decision implementation? So the oversight of the implementation of decisions. So again, interesting variation. You can see that on the board side, you've got this elongated, but it's going across the page, right? So we're seeing this linear thing between confidence and performance. Whereas the executive, although it's elongated in another direction. We're actually seeing a number of those operational elements, that implementation of decisions, dropping down into that bottom right-hand corner. So you can see for this organization, there are huge opportunities for development and collaborative work. So fascinating for us, as you can imagine, in the discussions that we had. So what are we seeing in terms of our perception between boards and executives? We're observing variations, all right? And the example that we used here, whilst obviously visually is meant to be striking, it's meant to be quite apparent. The variations between perceptions are apparent, and we're able to observe them, and we're able to quantify them, and we're able to visually portray them to a board and their executives. And I think, if anything else, the power of that, to be able to sit there in front of a board and say, visually, look at the differences between these two groups of individuals. Look at the differences in their perception of the performance and their confidence in that perception. And I think this is what is giving us I guess, the real scope to have difficult conversations, right? So being able to look at differences in patterns and being able to facilitate those difficult conversations, they are not easy. And anyone who does board work, anyone who's out there working as a COSEC, anyone who's in a governance role, and you're seeing these observations, you're seeing this, you're bearing witness to it, putting up your hand and saying, I'm bearing witness to that takes a huge amount of courage. And I think what we're finding is that being able to present this in a visual form with numerical data to support it makes a huge difference in being able to express that confidence. And we can identify outliers. So just as we saw there, we could identify the outlier of purpose and value clarity. And we can say, look, clarity of purpose and values, you've got that, you've nailed that. but there are aspects that we need to work on. So you can identify outliers across the indicators of good governance. Right, conscious of time. We're doing well, but I've got more to cover. So, as I've said before, our approach to looking at organizations is through a systems approach. Now, what this means is essentially we're trying to understand core themes that are going on across an organization's governance. Now, that might be specifically looking at boards, it might be broadening that and looking at boards and executives, as we've just looked at, or it might be looking at a broader, deeper, right through an organization, and we do that across different clients in different ways. But our approach covers off, and I'm going to read through all this, again, it's for your reference, but we cover off three core elements in our approach. We are really interested in the interconnected nature of governance. We are really interested in how is it that purpose has influenced decision making? How is it that the values that we aspire to and the behaviors that manifest, how do they influence the way that we communicate and therefore the quality of decisions we make? You can see how these things are circling around. We are absolutely focused on uncovering those relationships. We want to be able to give organizations the power to be able to harness those interrelationships. We are interested in governance as a whole system. We're not interested in the parts of those systems. I mean, we are, but we're more interested in the whole. And then finally, what we're interested in causality and patterns. Within complex systems, what you will uncover, and this is what the quote right at the beginning, we're not going to be able to control and predict, but what we can do is we can uncover patterns and we can begin to see relationships of causality. And that's what we're beginning to uncover. And I think this example will show you how effective that is across organizations. So here's a case study done in June 23, and then we've seen this organization grow over the last 12 and 18 months. And this is what we've seen. So broadly, not a bad picture, right? We're seeing 67, 64, 67, a good overall score of governance here, good consistent themes across culture, decision-making, and the oversight of the implementation of decisions. And in fact, deeper down within this organization, we also looked at the performance of that implementation as well. Looking at that, do you remember that reminder? So those 4 quadrants that we've got. So left-hand side, we're looking at people. These are the individuals across this organization. We're looking at their aggregate mean score for their performance, their perception of performance, and how confident they are in that. So you're seeing, a cluster of individuals on the right-hand side, but you are seeing a number of individuals perhaps not so enamored by the performance, but equally confident because of the shape of that. You see it's going across those 2 quadrants. It's not really extending into the left 2 quadrants. It's remaining in the right 2 quadrants. So wherever people are, they're generally confident. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the indices. These looking broadly good, actually, all clustered in the top right-hand corner. So the aggregate means for all of our 27 indices are saying people are perceiving these indices to be performing well, and they are generally confident about that. But there is a little bit of a spread of those indices, and there's certainly a spread of individuals. So, a reminder, what we're doing in the next step is we are trying to unpick the relationships between those indices and indeed also between the people. So this is what's going on. This is a visual representation of what our technology is doing. It's looking at all of the relationships that are going on between the individual's responses, between the indices and their aggregate means and confidence. We're trying to uncover broad themes and patterns of relationships, of interconnectedness. And what this enables us to do is then come up with key influencers. Because we can uncover patterns, because we can measure essentially the magnitude and the direction of these relationships, we can come up with core influences, core levers. So for this organization, this is what we came up with. So we've got three things here: embedding purpose and values, aligning behavior with values, and providing and ensuring it's available, meaningful information for decision making. Now, I'm not going to read through all this, but yeah, these make sense, right? Now, these are 3 of 27 aspects that we measure. And what we've done is we've drawn these 3 as being the key influential aspects that this organization should be working on. So what did they do? Well, they didn't work on all 3. They actually worked on just 2. So imagine this, you're given a choice. You've got 27 things you could work on. We've highlighted 3. This organization has decided to work on just 2 out of 27. So broadly speaking, you could say they're actually ignoring 25 aspects, but just focusing on 2. Now, traditional SWOT analysis would say, well, we'll get better at these 2 things. But what we're suggesting is that by working on these 2, you're going to affect other elements within the system. So we should see improvements across the whole system as a consequence of working on just these 2 aspects. So a reminder of their original data, 67, 64, 67. So this was actually after 15 months of work. So they spent quite a lot of time working on these 2 aspects. But overall, we can see actually the core governance thing I hadn't put up there, but it was initially 6.6, 66%. So they've uplifted overall governance by 5%. And they've uplifted others, as you can see, 72, 68, 72. So they've been working, if we imagine on our diagram, hopefully you can see my mouse, in this bottom right-hand corner here, they worked on one aspect of purpose and values. They worked on embedding the purpose and values as core themes across their organization. They also worked on one aspect in here in information quality. They worked on enhancing the meaningfulness of information that was available for decision making. That's it. They ignored all the others. So what did we see? Just looking at the categories themselves. So we saw uplifts across almost every category. I haven't drilled down here into the 27 attributes, but actually we saw uplifts in 22 of the 27 indices. And remember, they only worked on 2 of them. Now, this for us, and this is repeatable. This is what we're seeing with our clients time and time again. We are seeing governance operate as an interconnected system. And this is the beauty of being able to do this, because as you can imagine, there is huge power in therefore governance being a developmental tool that can be streamlined. You can get huge return on a relatively strategic investment. What do we see across their people? So here you can see the shape is slightly changing. We're bringing people up. We're bringing people into that top right-hand corner. So on aggregate mean, people are not drifting down into the bottom right-hand corner where they're thinking performance is not good around here, and we're confident about that. We're seeing less people in that bucket, and we're seeing people congregate. People are congregating in this top right-hand corner. So you can visually see people moving and changing within an organization. I think this is brilliant as well, right? So here we're seeing the indices gathering together. We're seeing culture becoming a lead driver. It is leading this organization's governance. So here is the fascinating thing. Here is it, post-intervention. Almost all of this organization's cultural indices are leading the decision-making, are leading the implementation of those decisions. Whereas previously, and we weren't saying that this was poor, but you could see that there wasn't really one aspect leading the other. but by working on clarity of purpose, by embedding that purpose into decision making, by embedding that purpose into the way that people communicate, we're seeing that culture is now driving the governance of this organization. We did have an outlier. It's always worth looking at outliers, just to smile and acknowledge that nothing's perfect. So this outlier here, purpose and values challenged. So we had a good conversation with this client, and we said, well, don't be downhearted by this, but essentially this is probably the hardest aspect that we see organizations working on with regards to getting purpose and values embedded into an organization. And that is when people bear witness to purpose and or values not being lived. Are they feeling safe enough to challenge that? Can they put their hands up and say, not sure that we're living our purpose right now? Because that may not be a bad thing. It may be that we need to strategically go around in order to get to the other side. But is it safe to simply just put my hand up and say? So it's something that this organization, unsurprisingly, is now looking at. But overall, what a great story, right? What a wonderful thing to see over the course of just 15 months. This is really just to point out, we asked the client really to come back to us or just focus on the last paragraph, not because I particularly wanted to put this up, but it really emphasized how our approach of looking at organizations and governance as this interconnectedness, this whole, and looking for causes and patterns. So they were simply saying that it was our understanding of the interplay between which allowed them to add this value. So from their perspective, it was the systems approach that enabled them to make such significant improvements from the prior year. So I'm just about to finish. Here we go. We've come up good on time, I think. So key observations. What are we seeing? And I've used language carefully here. Governance for us is definitely appearing. It's manifesting itself as a complex system. We're not saying definitively it is, because that would probably be wrong, or wrong of me to be so assertive. But I think it's definitely appearing as a complex system, and it's doing this time and time again. And therefore, it's our perspective that we need to therefore approach it through the lens of complexity. And this is a bit of a challenge. If there are regulators out there in this audience and they are looking at governance frameworks and they are looking at how they're going to improve the quality of governance across their communities, whether that's within a jurisdiction or within a broader community globally. Compliance-based linearity, from my perspective, is not the direction to travel. We really need to begin to look at governance as a complex system. It's how it manifests, it's how it appears. We have to look at it that way. And I think we've demonstrated repeatedly, and you remember that graph I put up at the beginning with that line that kind of went in this kind of inverted shape. Lost it. What we're seeing is consistent power law relationships. That means that we're consistently seeing that some aspects within an organization's governance are more influential than others. They help us predict. We can't predict, but they help us predict the performance of governance across organizations with more clarity than others. And again, it emphasizes the fact that governance is indeed a complex system. Thirdly, by utilizing a systems approach, we are able to really impact, and we've seen this in that second case study, really impact the performance of organizations and improve the chances of governance development within those organizations. And I don't want to beat SWOT analysis down, but I honestly believe that if we are going to approach organizations and indeed this instance governance by moving away from just doing SWOT analysis, by embracing a systems approach, we really can improve the chances of governance development. And at the same time, reducing costs of time, effort, and indeed financial resource. It's a win-win, right? But it does require hard work. We've done a lot of hard work. It's a gift. Here it is for you. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time because I'm not open for questions, but we're seeing four key themes emerging, and this is being repeated. Four key elements. Embedding purpose and values across organizations is absolutely paramount. It impacts more than 20 of the other factors in our governance framework. Empathic leadership, we talk about empathic leadership, we probably mean more compassionate leadership, but some people like the word empathy. This is influencing more than 18 of the other factors across our governance framework. The availability of meaningful information, extremely powerful in influencing aspects across our framework. And then independent assurance, maybe not quite as strong as you would like, but nevertheless influential on the impact of governance across organizations. And bang, there we go. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to open for questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Baron. That's fantastic and so interesting. And as a researcher myself, I absolutely love the fact that you share the evidence of the case studies and the data. So thank you very much for that. Before we go over to the Q&A, I have a quick question. I want to make a quick point and we'd love your thoughts on that. So you referred to influential aspects, and here you highlighted purpose, for example, in this case study that really affected the governance overall. But I guess that makes the point to say also that an organization is not only interconnected within itself, but also to society and its large environment. You're from the UK, and I'm aware of the development of the PAS 808 purpose-driven organization development at the moment. So I guess, awareness and emphasis on that in the environment would obviously also influence the organization inwards as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's I think there's a wonderful piece around purpose and what a purpose should look like from the John Templeton Institute, which is a large global organization. Some people may have heard of it. And they're actually focused in on individual purpose, but they broaden it slightly to purpose of groups of humans, which therefore one could assign to an organization, right? And they talk about it having three key aspects. One, that it should be in some way goal orientated. So that there needs to be a kind of aspiration to it. It needs to be goal orientated, but actually that goal almost needs to be unattainable. So they talk about this goal being not a smart goal that we say, oh, it's got to be, it's got to be attainable. Actually, they say purpose is aspirational. It's almost unattainable, but it's something you continually seek. It needs to be in some way measurable. You need to have some way of measuring your progress along that journey towards that aspiration. And I think it connects to this is why I brought this up. I think it connects to your last thing here. It needs to extend beyond the self. So in order for purpose to be meaningful, it needs to extend beyond me, or it needs to extend beyond the self of an organization. And this is where I think purpose connects to society. And this is why I think purpose, when it connects with an aspect that's beyond the organizational self, then I think it becomes truly powerful. And I think that evidence is supported by the John Templeton Foundation and their work. So I hope that connects with your kind of question and observation, Lindy.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Really interesting. And I think that really speaks to the meaning and definition of purpose itself as well, to individuals, the organization and society there. Okay, wonderful. But I won't take up all your time. Let's go to the Q&A. I don't know, Perrin, perhaps it's easier for you to just have a quick look, or do you want me to read the
I'm going to have a quick look, yeah, and we'll see. We've got a few questions. I'm going to start at the top. What I've got here, which is Danny. So I've seen previous research from director includes CEO perception of their ability to contribute their potential, i.e., be heard. And there was a strong outlier response from the chair and slightly less so CEO. Other directors had far lower reporting on their ability to be heard. Interpretation of some of your data. Okay, yeah, I'm trying to comprehend this as I'm here. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that we have come across organizations where CEOs find themselves in this paradox, where they find themselves as obviously seats on a board, but they also find themselves in charge of that executive. So they're straddling these roles, and I think that that's really challenging. And certainly in the discussions that we've had, where we have seen quite large differences between a board's perception and the executive's perception, the CEO has found themselves in quite a tough place because they're having to straddle those differences. And I don't know if Danny, that's what you're getting at, but we are seeing some of that now. The way our technology and methodology works is we can't identify individuals, but we can identify broad demographics. So as our data is growing, we're beginning to identify essentially the positions of CEO amongst broader groups. We haven't got a large enough data set to be able to begin to draw conclusions from that. But in our more qualitative discussions with CEOs, when we are seeing these broader differences between boards and executives, we are seeing their challenge. And I hope that goes some way to either supporting or not your perspective. So hopefully that helps. Saeed, how contribute towards good governance of Okay, thank you. Yeah, how does it contribute? Well, I mean, all I can say is we clearly use AI and we use machine learning in our work. It has been, we wouldn't be able to do what we do actually without it. Now, AI is a broad hot topic. Has been for the last sort of 2 years. It's grown in a particular direction. The AI and machine learning that we use is probably the ones that's been around since the 1960s, right? So it's around mathematical calculations and analysis. It's not about large language models. But we are very much utilizing machine learning in our development of our understanding of the interrelationships. Without it, it would be pretty tough. So absolutely, I think it is changing governance through the analysis of data. That's hopefully clear in our work. But I also think that it probably has a role to play using and within large language models and the development of AI as we're now seeing it and people are talking about it. It's not a topic for today, so I'm not going to go down that road. But yeah, thank you, Saeed. Damien, question, please. Is there any pushback on survey fatigue when it's done frequently over 27 data points? It's interesting. We get an initial perspective from organizations and leaders that survey fatigue might be an issue. However, what we have found, and we strategically do this as a kind of part of our method, is because we've analyzed relationships, we essentially can begin to reduce the number of statements that we ask as we learn what's going on in an organization. So again, it's the power of AI and machine learning. So we start out with a full 36 statements, but actually we can get that down to 9 and still understand what's going on inside an organization due to our understandings of the interconnections and interrelationships. So yes, we get initial pushback, but when they realize that as they progress through a journey with us, the number of statements decreases, that they're quite happy with that. Okay, I hope that answers. Gavin, given this, I'm not asking any single question. Even if asking how many questions does you? Please advise, even if how many questions does your definition reference? Okay, so we cover 27 aspects. We ask 36 questions initially. We run 2 surveys in parallel. We cross-validate for internal validity. We get high correlational scores. How does your diagnosis reference? How long do you give the board to address this? Well, we work with the board, to be honest. So the organization that we gave as a case study, they wanted 12 months, and we gave them 12 months. Some boards want longer, some want less. And so we really work with the boards themselves to determine that. But we do suggest that they don't assess more frequently than each quarter. It would be too much. So normally it's every 6 months. Hope that helps. And secondly, in other seconds, do you accompany this with one-on-one meetings with individual directors? Yeah, as part of our model, that's more of our work in terms of our actual client work. Yes, absolutely. We would collect qualitative data from directors and groups. We run focus groups. But the beauty of the way that we do it is obviously we can hone in on outliers. We can look at clusters where we want to focus our discussions. So we're not sort of putting our finger in the air and spreading our bets as to where we want to talk to, what we want to talk to directors about. We can actually hone in. Okay, keep going down. How can an organization introduce board evaluations, assess the leadership? How can organizations introduce board evaluations, assess? How? Goodness. By looking at it as a beautiful and amazing developmental opportunity. And I think this is why, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm kind of, digging at regulators, but because they have a real important role to play. But the more we could focus on governance development rather than ticking a box of compliance, I think we're going to move into the realms where this becomes a norm, and it really should become a norm for every organization. It's a developmental exercise. It is not a critique to to beat people with a stick. It is around, we want to make this better. How could we do that? So hopefully that helps. Thank you, Terry. How does your approach cultivate ownership and wider context? Yeah. So when we dissect our data and when we give it demographics, we're able to attribute characteristics to an organization. I haven't covered it here. It's too much in an hour. But yes, we can essentially look at the way that organizations are owned or structured. So whether they're in the PE space or whether they're privately owned or whether they're governmental organizations, obviously all of these have an impact on the way in which an organization governs itself. But the attributes of governance that we measure don't change. What we do is we customize the survey to meet the structure and needs of that board stroke organization. Hope that helps. How to deal with the non-serious mindset of the board about board independence. Yeah, I mean, I think when we begin to show the influence and where independent assurance impacts an organization's governance. So there are 15 elements within our framework that independent assurance touches, right? And when we start talking to boards and we say, well, look, here's where independent assurance is lighting up your governance. It's lighting up here and here and here and here and here. And I go, okay, I think we can see the importance of independent assurance now. It's not just a thing we tag on the bottom. No, it's not a thing you're tagging on the bottom. It's a thing that's interrelated into all aspects of your organization. Yeah, as we saw, only 2 out of 27. Yeah, that was maybe that was related to the indices that we highlighted for that organization. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that. How does a social entrepreneur be fostered within a system? How does a social entrepreneur be fostered within a system of good governance? I don't know if I understand the question, but if I answer it wrong, apologies. I would say Coasteer and our team, we are social entrepreneurs. We are endeavoring to make a difference to the world. But at the same time, we're also within the private sector, right? We're a private organization. So how does a social entrepreneur be fostered within a system of good governance? I would say they're totally overlapped, right? Because governance and the quality of governance is a social responsibility, right? So they're inseparable. I don't know if I answered your question.
Agreed, Darren, yes. And at the very least, there's a lot of research and evidence that shows the link between social responsibility and financial performance. So at the very least, an organization should engage in the social practice and good practice towards financial performance, if they're not out of purpose and conscience. I think we're out of time.
We are. There's a couple more questions. I'll quickly do that. Any difference in this approach with a charitable organization? The difference is, I think, what I alluded to before, Lillian, which is essentially we look at the structure and the ownership, and we customize the statement design around that nature. And then the other one's just a thank you. Yeah, so Lindy, I think we're good to go. I think there's lots of questions that were also in the chat, but obviously can't answer them all.
Yeah, okay, no. So those questions that still remain, please feel free to reach out to Perrin via Coast here on his website. You'll find his contact details. And then, of course, especially also on the Good Governance Academy's website, be on the lookout for the Research Forum tab where you can also reach us. Perrin, wow, this has been a quick hour. I can't believe it. Thank you so much once again. It's so insightful. Indeed, we'll have you back as our audience requests as well. But thank you once again, an honor. And then once again, also thank you to the GGA and to Carolyn for the good work towards achieving good governance overall. Thanks to our audience, and we will see you again soon. Have a good day further.